2 years ago, I made a delivery that I still can't explain. I've tried. Believe me, I've tried. The address was correct. The gate code worked. A man came to the door, checked the cargo, signed the paperwork. Everything was exactly the way it's supposed to go. I only found out something was wrong when I got back to the depot, and when they showed me what was wrong, I understood that whatever I delivered that night, it was already waiting for me before I left the yard. The loading dock light was on. That was the first thing. A single bulb above the bay door, throwing yellow light down onto the concrete apron below. It was 2:47 in the morning, and the building looked like it had been dead for decades. Walls streaked with rust, windows boarded, weeds pushing up through every crack in the apron. But that light was on, steady, like someone had turned it on recently and left it there for a reason. I checked the address on the manifest against the number above the bay door. They matched. I sat in the cab for a moment, looking at that light. Then I backed the trailer up to the dock. The manifest said 42 units of industrial refrigeration equipment. Heavy, expensive, the kind of cargo that requires a signature from an authorized receiver before you touch a single strap. I'd been hauling this kind of freight for 9 years. I knew the protocol. I knew what a functioning receiving dock looked like, and I knew what an abandoned one looked like. This looked like both at the same time. I climbed out and walked to the personnel door beside the bay. I knocked 3 times, standard, loud enough to hear through a warehouse wall. 30 seconds passed. The door opened. The man who opened it was maybe 60 thin, work shirt buttoned to the collar despite the cold. He held a clipboard at his side and looked at me with the flat, patient expression of someone who has been doing the same job for a very long time and has stopped finding any part of it interesting. He asked if I had the refrigeration units. I said yes. He nodded and stepped back to let me see inside. The warehouse was dark past the first 20 feet. What I could see was empty, concrete floor, bare walls, a single work light on a stand near the door, casting a small circle of yellow onto the ground. No equipment, no shelving, no sign that the space was being actively used for anything. But it didn't smell abandoned. It smelled like a working building, oil, dust, the faint chemical smell of industrial cleaning product. The smell of a place that had people in it regularly. I unstrapped the load and moved the units to the dock with the pallet jack. The man stood to the side and watched without helping, which wasn't unusual. Receivers don't touch freight. That's not their job. When I finished, I handed him the manifest and a pen. He signed without looking at the paper. A single fluid signature, the pen barely pausing. He tore off the receiver's copy, handed it back to me, and said, "Have a good night," the way people say it when they mean the conversation is over. I drove back to the depot. The night dispatcher looked at my paperwork for a long time before she looked at me. She asked me to confirm the delivery address. I did. She typed something, read the screen, typed again. Then she picked up the phone and called someone. She turned slightly away from me while she talked, which told me something was wrong before she said a word. When she hung up, she told me to wait. 40 minutes later, I was sitting across from the operations manager and a woman I didn't recognize, who turned out to be from the company's legal department. They showed me a document on a laptop screen. A municipal demolition order, dated 6 years earlier. Photographs of the building. My building, same address, same bay door, being systematically torn down. Walls coming apart, roof collapsing inward, the concrete apron broken up by machinery. The building I had delivered to 6 hours ago had been demolished 6 years ago. The lot was listed in municipal records as cleared and vacant pending rezoning. I told them about the loading dock light, about the man with the clipboard, about the signature on the manifest. The legal woman asked if she could see the receiver's copy. I handed it to her. She looked at it for a long time without saying anything. Then she turned the paper toward me and asked me to look at the signature. I looked at it, my throat closed. I had watched the man sign that paper. I had seen his hand move across the line, seen the pen lift at the end of the signature, seen him hand it back to me. I had folded it and put it in my shirt pocket and driven 60 miles back to the depot with it sitting against my chest. The signature line was blank, not smudged, not faded, blank, as if no pen had ever touched it. I told them I had watched him sign it. I told them the signature was there when he handed it back. The legal woman wrote something in a notebook and didn't respond. They sent someone to the address the next morning. I wasn't there, but I got the report secondhand from another driver who knew someone on the inspection team. Vacant lot. Cracked concrete, weeds, no structures of any kind. No evidence of recent vehicle access, except for two things the inspection team noted in their report and apparently couldn't account for. Fresh tire tracks on the concrete apron, the right width for a semi and trailer, and above where the bay door would have been, mounted on a section of wall that shouldn't have been standing, a single light fixture. Bulb still warm. I've gone over every detail I can access since then. The manifest, the route, the timing, the description of the man. Everything checks out on my end. I went to the right address. I delivered the right cargo. I watched a man sign for it. The cargo is gone. 42 units of industrial refrigeration equipment, each one weighed and logged at the origin warehouse, loaded under camera, sealed and strapped by me personally. Gone. And the only record that the delivery happened at all is a piece of paper with a blank signature line that I watched a man fill in with his own hand. I keep coming back to the way he said, "Have a good night." Not automatic, not polite, deliberate. The way you say something when you know something the other person doesn't. Like he already knew what I was going to find when I looked at that paper and wanted to make sure I got far enough down the road before I looked. 42 units of industrial refrigeration equipment, weighed, logged, filmed leaving the origin warehouse. Loaded by his hands, strapped by his hands, driven 60 miles through the middle of the night. Gone, not misplaced, not stolen. Gone into a building that hasn't existed for 6 years. But here's the detail that doesn't let me go. The bulb was still warm. Something turned that light on before he arrived. Something knew he was coming, knew the address on the manifest, knew exactly what time a truck would be backing into that dock. And whatever signed for the delivery, it didn't sign the paper. It signed him. Because now he's the only proof that any of it happened, and nobody believes him. The cargo needed to get somewhere. It got there. The only question worth losing sleep over is what needed 42 refrigeration units, and why it needed them that badly. The man who received the delivery was already waiting at the door when I pulled in. That was the first thing that felt wrong. It was 3:20 in the morning. I hadn't called ahead. There was no protocol for that on overnight drops, just a code for the gate and instructions to leave the cargo in the receiving bay. But he was there, standing in the doorway with his arms crossed and his eyes already on my headlights before I'd finished turning into the lot. Like he'd been listening for me. The address was a cold storage facility on the outskirts of Murfreesboro. Medium-sized operation, the kind that handles overflow inventory for regional distributors. I delivered there twice before, both times during the day, both times unremarkable. The building looked the same at night. Gray panels, loading bays on the south side, a chain-link fence around the perimeter with a keypad gate. The gate code worked. That should have meant everything was normal. I backed into Bay 3 as instructed and climbed out. The man walked toward me across the dock without hurrying. He was tall, late 50s, wearing a gray insulated vest over a dark shirt. His face was the kind of face that doesn't give anything away, not unfriendly, not welcoming, just present. He asked if I had the pharmaceutical cargo from Nashville. I said yes. He nodded once and turned back toward the building. I followed protocol, broke the trailer seal, logged the number, began moving units to the dock with the jack. 18 pallets of temperature-controlled pharmaceutical supplies, each one shrink-wrapped and labeled, each one matching the manifest line by line. The man stood at the edge of the dock and watched me work. He didn't check the labels, didn't count the pallets, just watched with his arms crossed and his eyes moving slowly across the cargo in a way that felt less like inventory and more like something else I couldn't name. It took 40 minutes to unload. He didn't speak the entire time. When I finished, I handed him the manifest. He took it, produced a pen from his vest pocket, and signed at the bottom of each page. 3 pages, 3 signatures, each one identical. The same controlled, unhurried movement, the pen never lifting between letters. He handed the paperwork back. I checked the signatures. Clean, legible, a full name I could read clearly. He said, "Drive safe." I drove back to Nashville. The morning dispatcher flagged my paperwork before I'd finished my coffee. She called me into the office with a tone that told me to bring the cup because I was going to be there a while. The operations manager was already inside. So was someone from the pharmaceutical company's regional office who had driven in before dawn, which told me whatever was wrong enough that someone had made that decision at 4 in the morning. The pharmaceutical company representative put a document on the table, a cancellation notice, time-stamped 72 hours earlier. The client had canceled the entire order, all 18 pallets, citing a storage capacity issue. The cancellation had been processed, confirmed, and logged. The cargo had been pulled from the delivery schedule. No one had reauthorized it. No one had updated the manifest in the system. No one had issued a new delivery order or given me that gate code or that bay assignment. I told them about the man, the gray vest, the crossed arms, the 3 signatures. I told them he was already at the door when I pulled in, that he knew what I was carrying before I said a word. The representative looked at the signed pages for a long time. Then he asked me to read the name on the signatures out loud. I read it. The room went quiet in a specific way. Not the quiet of people thinking. The quiet of people who already know something and are deciding how much to say. The operations manager turned his laptop toward me. A personnel file, the kind with a photograph in the top corner. The man in the photograph was tall, late 50s, the kind of face that doesn't give anything away. It was him. Exactly him. The gray vest, the same flat expression, the same eyes. The operations manager said this man had been the night supervisor at that facility for 11 years. He had died 8 months ago. A cardiac event, alone in the facility during his shift. They found him the next morning in Bay 3. Bay 3. I felt the coffee cup in my hand, but couldn't feel my hand. I told them that was impossible. I told them I had stood 10 feet from that man for 40 minutes. I had handed him a pen. I had watched his hand move across 3 pages of paperwork. I had heard his voice. Nobody in that room said anything. The representative stood up and asked us to go to the facility with him. Right then, all 3 of us in his car. Nobody waiting until morning. Nobody filing a report first. The urgency in the way he said it wasn't professional. It was something closer to fear, dressed up as authority. We drove to Murfreesboro in silence. The gate code still worked. The representative used it without hesitating, which meant he'd known it already, which meant the facility was still in the system as an active client despite the cancellation. That detail settled into me somewhere and didn't move. We went straight to Bay 3. The representative stopped at the bay door and put his hand on the surface before opening it, like he was checking for something. Then he lifted the latch and pulled it open. The cold hit us immediately. Not the ambient cold of a November night. Something deeper, more deliberate. The specific cold of a space that has been maintaining a precise temperature for a sustained period. The kind of cold that costs money to produce and requires active machinery to sustain. All 18 pallets were there, exactly as I'd left them 4 hours earlier. Shrink wrap intact, labels unbroken, stacked in the same configuration I'd built them in. The cargo that had been canceled, that no one had authorized, that no one had ordered received or processed, sitting in Bay 3 at exactly the right temperature. The representative walked slowly between the pallets without touching them. He stopped at the far end of the bay and stood there with his back to us for a moment. When he turned around, his face had changed in a way I didn't want to look at directly. He said the facility's refrigeration system had been decommissioned 8 months ago, switched off the day after the night supervisor died, as part of the process of suspending operations while the company decided what to do with the property. There was no active refrigeration in that building. The operations manager asked how the bay was cold. The representative didn't answer. He walked back past us and out of the bay without saying anything else. We heard his footsteps cross the dock and stop. I looked at the cargo one more time before I followed. 18 pallets. The right temperature. In a building with no power to its cooling systems. Authorized by no one. Signed for by a man who had been dead for 8 months. I thought about the way he'd stood at the edge of the dock for 40 minutes watching me work. The way his eyes moved across the cargo, not counting, not checking. Something else. Something that looked less like receiving an order and more like finally getting something back that had been missing for a long time. I thought about what the operations manager had said. They found him in Bay 3. He never left. He'd just been waiting for someone to bring him something worth staying for. The refrigeration system had been off for 8 months, but the bay was cold. Exactly the right temperature. For cargo that nobody ordered, nobody authorized, and nobody was supposed to receive. Something maintained that temperature. Something that understood what those 18 pallets needed to stay intact. Something that had been in Bay 3 long enough to learn how the systems worked. And here's what nobody said out loud in that room. The gate code worked. A code from a canceled account for a facility in suspension on a delivery that didn't exist. Someone kept that code active. Someone who knew exactly what night to use it. He didn't wander into that bay by accident. He went back to the only place he knew and waited 8 months for a delivery that would give him a reason to stay. The receiving door was open when I backed in. Not unlocked. Open. Propped with a rubber wedge from the inside, yellow light spilling out onto the loading bay in a narrow strip. It was 2:15 in the morning, and I was at the rear of St. Carol Medical Center with 14 pallets of surgical supplies and a delivery window that the manifest said closed at 3. I climbed out and knocked on the open door anyway. Protocol. A woman appeared from the corridor inside. Scrubs, dark hair pulled back, a lanyard with a badge I couldn't read from where I stood. She asked if I had the surgical order. I said yes. She stepped back and waved me in. She was calm in the specific way hospital staff are calm at 2 a.m. Not relaxed, just efficient. Like the hour meant nothing because the work didn't stop for hours. She directed me down a corridor to a set of double doors marked receiving Wing D and stood aside while I worked the pallet jack through. Wing D was quiet. Long corridor, linoleum floor, overhead lights on, but dim to the nighttime setting that hospitals use to signal to patients that it's still dark outside and they should still be sleeping. The smell was standard, antiseptic, recycled air, something faintly chemical underneath both. Nothing unusual. Nothing that told me to pay attention. I unloaded all 14 pallets into the receiving area at the end of the corridor. She checked each one against a clipboard, ticking boxes with a pen that clicked every time she pressed it. The clicking was the only sound besides the wheels of the pallet jack on the linoleum. When I finished, she signed the manifest without being asked. Full name, clear and deliberate. The kind of signature that belongs to someone who signs things carefully because they understand that signatures matter. She handed it back, said the facility appreciated the on-time delivery. I drove back to Memphis. The day supervisor called me before I'd gotten home. Not the night dispatcher, the day supervisor. which meant someone had come in early specifically to make this call. He asked me to come in immediately, not after I slept. Immediately. When I got there, the operations manager was waiting with two people I didn't recognize. One of them was from the hospital's administrative office. The other one didn't introduce himself and didn't need to. The way he sat told me he was there to listen and remember, not to participate. The hospital representative put a document on the table, an internal closure notice for Wing D, dated 4 months earlier. Water damage from a pipe failure in the ceiling had compromised the structural integrity of the corridor. Wing D had been sealed, emptied, and closed to all staff and patients, pending repairs that were still ongoing. No staff were assigned to Wing D. No staff had access to Wing D, the receiving area at the end of that corridor had been decommissioned when the wing closed. I told them about the woman, the scrubs, the lanyard, the clipboard, the pen that clicked. I told them she was already at the door when I arrived, that she knew what I was carrying. The hospital representative asked to see the signed manifest. I slid it across the table. He looked at the signature for a long time. Then he took out his phone, found something on the screen, and placed it face up on the table next to the manifest. It was an employee profile page from the hospital's internal directory. Name, department, photograph. The woman in the photograph had dark hair pulled back. A lanyard with a badge. I didn't need him to tell me. I could see it. He told me anyway. She had been a receiving coordinator for Wing D for 6 years. She had been one of 3 staff members working in the wing the night the pipe failed. The other 2 had been in a different section and got out immediately. She hadn't. They found her in the receiving area at the end of the corridor. The ceiling had come down fast and without warning. She hadn't suffered, they said, which is the thing people say when they want to close a door on a conversation. She had been dead for 4 months. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then the man who hadn't introduced himself leaned forward and asked a question that I'm still not sure I've found the bottom of. He asked where the 14 pallets were. I looked at the operations manager. He looked at the hospital representative. The hospital representative looked at his hands. They had sent someone to Wing D that morning. The corridor was sealed exactly as it had been for 4 months. Plastic sheeting over the entrance, caution tape, the works, undisturbed, no sign of entry. They cut the seal and went in. The corridor was empty. Linoleum floor, dimmed overhead lights, the smell of water damage and old antiseptic. At the end of the corridor, in the decommissioned receiving area, 14 pallets of surgical supplies were stacked in the exact configuration I had built them in. Shrink wrap intact, labels unbroken. Sitting in a sealed wing that nobody had entered in 4 months, delivered through a door that had been locked from the inside. The manifest was in my hand with her signature on it. 14 pallets of surgical supplies in a wing that had been closed for 4 months. I've thought about what she said when I finished unloading. The facility appreciated the on-time delivery, not she, not we. The facility, like she was speaking for the building itself. Like the building had been waiting 4 months in the dark for someone to finally bring what it needed, and she was just the one it sent the door. She was already at the door when he arrived, at 2:15 in the morning, in a sealed wing, behind a door locked from the inside. She didn't wander out of wherever the dead go between shifts. She was positioned, waiting. She knew the delivery window closed at 3, and she was there with a clipboard and a pen that clicked and the specific calm of fall. Someone who has been doing the same job for a very long time. 4 months dead and still clocking in. But here's what breaks something in me. The facility appreciated the on-time delivery. She didn't say thank you. She didn't say I appreciated it. She said the facility. Which means whatever is left of her in that wing isn't just her anymore. Something else is using her to receive what it needs. And it needed surgical supplies badly enough to wait 4 months in the dark for someone to bring them. Don't ask what it's doing with them. You don't want that answer. Someone was already waiting at the door. That's what doesn't let go. Not the demolished warehouse, not the dead supervisor, not the sealed wing. The waiting. Door open, clipboard ready, eyes on the headlights before the truck finished turning in. They knew the address, the cargo, the gate code, the delivery window. Someone gave them that information. Think about every delivery going out tonight. Every driver pulling into a dark lot at 3 a.m. with instructions and no reason to. Question whether the person at the door should be there. Think about what's been arriving at places that shouldn't exist and what those places have been doing with it. If these case files are staying with you, subscribe and turn on notifications. New files every week. 2 more videos are on the final screen. Both involve drivers who followed instructions they shouldn't have. Neither ends at the destination on the manifest. I'm Morrigan. Next time someone's already waiting at the door, check the manifest again. Something may have changed the address.